It's a day like any other. You're scrolling through your phone, maybe sitting on your desk, when you come across an article about Japan. Nothing unusual, but then you read something that makes you stop. There are objects in Japan. I'm talking about everyday objects that people absolutely refuse to touch. Not because they're dirty, and not because they're dangerous in any physical sense, but because they believe these objects are cursed, spiritually contaminated, possessed by something that watches and waits. Now you might laugh it off at first. Superstition, right? Old folklore that nobody really takes seriously anymore. But then you dig a little deeper and you realize that millions of Japanese people, even today in 2026, still follow these ancient warnings. They'll cross the street to avoid certain items. They'll refuse to bring specific objects into their home. And some will even perform elaborate rituals to dispose of these things properly because throwing them away carelessly could invite disaster. And the more you learn about it, the less you want to laugh. Because some of these objects, they might be in your house right now. Welcome to the terrifying world of the Tsukumogami and cursed objects from Japanese folklore. Today, we're going to explore the items that Japanese people have feared for centuries. Objects that absorbed so much negative energy, resentment, or spiritual power that they've transformed into something else entirely. Something aware and something malevolent. Now by the end of this, you'll understand why entire generations have been taught to handle certain objects with extreme caution, and why, even in our modern technological age, these superstitions still persist with shocking intensity. Let's start with the foundation. In Japanese Shinto belief, there's a concept called Tsukumogami. The idea is simple but deeply unsettling. Any object that reaches 100 years old can spontaneously gain a soul and become sentient. Your grandmother's antique mirror, the old doll in the attic, the worn out umbrella in your closet. If they're old enough, they could be watching you right now. But here's where it gets darker, because not all of these awakenings are peaceful. When an object gets discarded carelessly, treated with disrespect, or becomes a vessel for negative emotions, it's an awakening that can be violent and vengeful. The object doesn't just gain consciousness, it gains anger, resentment, a desire for revenge against the humans who mistreated it or forgot about it. Now this belief runs so deep in Japanese culture that there's an entire festival dedicated to appeasing these potentially vengeful objects. Now it's called the Harikyo, the Festival of Broken Needles. People bring their old, bent, broken sewing needles to temples and shrines where they're given a proper funeral. The needles are gently stuck into soft tofu or konnyaku, giving them a final resting place after years of hard work piercing through tough fabric. Monks perform ceremonies to thank the needles for their service and to ensure their spirits don't become angry. Think about that for a second. An entire festival dedicated to making sure your sewing needles don't become vengeful ghosts. But needles are just the beginning. There are objects far more dangerous, far more feared, and the stories surrounding them are absolutely chilling. Now let's talk about Japanese dolls, particularly the traditional ones. In Western culture, we're familiar with the haunted doll series, creepy dolls in horror movies, all of that. But in Japan, the fear of dolls goes much deeper because the Tsukumogami beliefs are something even more sinister. The idea that dolls can house human souls. Now there's a famous doll in Japan called the Okiku. She sits in the temple of Hokkaido and her hair continues to grow. I'm not talking about a little bit. When the doll first arrived at the temple in 1938, she had short hair cut at shoulder length, and now decades later, her hair reaches down to her knees and has to be trimmed regularly by monks who care for her. The story goes that the doll was purchased by a young man named Ekeji Suzuki in 1918 for his 2-year-old sister, Okiku. She loved that doll more than anything, carrying it everywhere, sleeping with it every night. But then a tragedy happened. Okiku became ill and died shortly after. The family was devastated. They placed the doll in the family altar to honor her memory, and that's when strange things started to happen. The family noticed the doll's hair seemed to be getting longer. At first, they thought they were imagining it. The grief was playing tricks on their minds. But it kept on growing, and undeniably, impossibly growing. They became convinced that Okiku's spirit had entered the doll and that she was still with them in some form. Eventually, the family moved and couldn't take the doll with them, so they brought it to the temple. The monks there have cared for it ever since, and they do confirm that yes, the hair does grow. They've had it examined. It's real human hair. There's no mechanism, no trick. The doll's hair just grows. And this isn't some isolated story either. There are dozens of famous haunted dolls in Japan. So many, in fact, that there are temples entirely dedicated to housing them, shrines where people bring dolls that they no longer want because they're afraid to simply throw them away. The dolls are given proper funeral rites before being cremated or stored, because disposing of a doll improperly could anger the spirit within it. And here's what really gets people. It's not just the antique dolls. Any doll, if it's cherished enough, if enough emotion is poured into it, can potentially house a spirit. That means the doll your child sleeps with every single night could theoretically develop a consciousness. Most people would say that's absurd, but try telling that to the thousands of people who visit doll temples every year, faces pale with genuine fear as they hand over dolls they swear have moved on their own, dolls whose eyes even seem to follow them around the room. Now, moving on from dolls, let's discuss another category of cursed objects that terrifies people: mirrors. Now, in Japanese folklore, mirrors are considered deeply spiritual objects capable of trapping souls and opening doorways to other realms. There's actually a specific type of yokai associated with old mirrors called the Kyorinrin, a mirror spirit that emerges when a mirror becomes a Tsukunogami. But the real fear surrounding mirrors goes beyond folklore. There are documented cases of mirrors in Japan that people absolutely refuse to touch or even look at. Old mirrors from the Edo period or earlier are considered especially dangerous because of how much they've seen over the centuries. Every reflection captured in that mirror, every person who's looked into it, every death, and every tragedy that's occurred in front of it, all of that is believed to be absorbed into the glass itself. Now, there's a famous cursed mirror in Tokyo's National Museum that has a genuinely disturbing history. According to the stories, everyone who has owned this particular mirror has died under a mysterious or tragic circumstances. The museum keeps it in storage now, not on display, and very few people are allowed to even know where it's kept. The staff, who do know, refuse to go near it without performing protective rituals first. The superstition around mirrors is so strong that many Japanese people won't buy antique mirrors under any circumstances. It doesn't matter how beautiful they are, how much they cost, how perfect they'd look in your home. The risk simply isn't worth it. Because if that mirror has absorbed any negative energy, if someone died looking into it, if it witnessed terrible things, then having it in your house can invite that darkness into your life. There are rules about mirrors as well. Never sleep facing a mirror because your soul could be stolen while you're still vulnerable. Never bring a mirror from a deceased person's home into your own. And if a mirror breaks, it must be disposed of very carefully, wrapped in cloth, and buried or taken to a shrine of purification. Because simply just throwing a broken mirror into the trash, that's inviting 7 years of bad luck at minimum, and potentially much worse. Now, some of the most feared cursed objects in Japan aren't grand or dramatic. They're small, everyday items that you wouldn't think twice about, like combs. Traditional Japanese combs, especially those made of wood or tortoiseshell, are considered extremely prone to becoming tsukumogamis because they're in such intimate contact with a person's body. They touch your hair, your scalp, and they're used as daily grooming rituals, sometimes for decades. And when someone dies, their comb is supposed to be destroyed or buried with them, because keeping a dead person's comb or selling it is considered extremely unlucky because the comb has absorbed so much of that person's essence that it's practically part of them. There have been horror stories passed down through generations about people who have inherited or bought antique combs only to be haunted by the previous owner's spirit. The comb becomes a tether, anchoring the spirit to this world, and the spirit isn't usually happy about it. People report seeing the previous owner in mirrors, feeling a phantom hand touching their heads, or having their hair pulled by invisible forces at night, and some claim that their hands fall out in clumps or turn gray overnight after using a cursed comb. Even new combs aren't safe. If you lose one and someone else uses it, you've created a spiritual connection between yourself and a stranger, potentially leading to accidental curses flowing both ways. And then there are katanas. A katana is considered to have a soul, forged through spiritual rituals, but cursed objects like the swords exist too, blades that drive owners to violence. And the most famous is the Muramasa, whose blades were so bloodthirsty they drove the wielders mad. Tokugawa Ieyasu banned them after family members were killed by them. Even today, collectors report terrible luck and violent thoughts until getting rid of them. Now, these aren't just old superstitions. Walk into any Japanese temple and you'll see people bringing cursed objects for disposal. The doll temple in Tokyo holds thousands, each brought by someone too afraid to throw it away. So next time you see an antique doll, an old mirror, or a vintage comb at sale, think twice, because according to millions in Japan, that object might carry more than memories. It might carry a consciousness, a resentment, or a curse, and some curses are better left undisturbed.